Hi, my name is Johnny B, and today we're going to talk about what really is socialism. You guys need to understand this because in universities, they are twisting the minds of people, and they're trying to make socialism sound like this wonderful thing. Okay, it's not. And they're also lying to you and telling you what is socialism and what isn't socialism. One of the best videos I found that actually does that is this Change My Mind video by Stephen Crowder. He sits down with a University of Illinois student, and this kid has his preconceived notion of what socialism is. I am going to break this up many times so that I can insert what I have to say so you can kind of really understand what's going on here, all right? But by the end of this, I hope you have a true perception of what socialism really is. Socialism is a precursor to communism. Socialism is the intermediary, all right, that's from the destruction of capitalism to the insertion of communism, all right? It is the economic and political platform, as communism is the political platform as well as the cultural platform. All right, this is where the indoctrination comes in. This is where this cultural Marxism comes in and takes place, and we talk about that later. But today we're going to talk about what is socialism, and here we go.
That's all you need for a crowd like this. All right, what is your name, sir? Yusuf, nice to meet you. Stephen. So I believe, let me explain my position. I believe that socialism is fundamentally evil. And I have this here. We usually don't reference this, but it's sources in case someone wants to look at them afterward, but I won't use it. It's not fair for me to use them. So I believe socialism is evil. Right. You disagree. I would love to hear you change my mind.
Okay, well, what's your position on the minimum wage?
Okay. He's starting off right off the bat because this is what he perceives. He believes that we need a minimum wage. Those who understand what socialism is and understand what capitalism is don't like minimum wage. You need a true free market in order to push up or push down the value of the minimum wage. Minimum wage is there not designed to have people live on it. It's designed for people that are in high school or beginning in college that are learning a job. That's what it's designed for. So that people who are starting off working at McDonald's who are 16, 17 years old can learn the value of hard work. They're getting paid. They understand what it is, but it's not enough to live on. It's not supposed to be. It's for them to have a little bit of money and learn the value of how to control that money. Okay?
Hold on a second. This is your changing my mind? I want to make sure.
Yes, I want to get started.
Okay, my position on the minimum wage. Yeah, you know what? I'm not a fan.
So you think there shouldn't be any minimum wage at all?
Yeah, not a fan.
Zero.
Not a fan.
Okay, are you against illegal immigration and legal immigration from poor third world countries at the scale that we've been having?
Okay, now he's going off. He's asking again, are we against illegal or immigration from all these third world countries like we're seeing? Yeah, I am.
Doing it so far.
Am I against illegal immigration? The answer is, what was that? Volume. Well, we're going to do everything we can. Like we said, this is last minute because we're not necessarily friendly here. I'm against, no, I mean, they don't consider us friendly. So like I said, we appreciate you supporting us. Of course I'm against illegal immigration. But again, socialism, I believe the idea of socialism, let's do this before we go on, okay?
Right.
Because this is something, and I think this is important, this is something that we often see from both the right and the left. See, we started with the premise where I made a statement. Socialism is evil.
Right.
And you've moved on to different questions, different topics. So I'd like to first, before we move on, if it's okay, let's define socialism.
Okay.
How do you define socialism? So I know that we're agreeing on that premise.
Socialism is a system in which the state redistributes wealth from what it would be under a pure capitalist system.
Okay, I think we agree on that. Okay.
Boom. Okay, he's got it right. It's the redistribution of wealth, okay, that is controlled by the government. Okay, but it's not an equal distribution of wealth. In fact, if you check out Webster's dictionary, it will actually tell you unequal distribution of wealth. People think that it is an equal distribution. No, it's not. They assume very differently.
then I think it's important to, but don't boo. This is just an actual discussion. I might be wrong here. And what do you think I mean by evil, or what would we both agree the definition of evil is?
Harmful to society.
Not necessarily to society. I believe morally reprehensible. It's immoral. Okay. So as we both agreed, socialism is basically a governmental control of the distribution or means of distribution or production. And when I say evil, I mean I believe that is immoral. So can we both agree with that?
I don't agree that it's evil.
No. But we agree that that's what I'm saying. That's my position.
Yes.
Okay. So what part of my position do you disagree with? Again, the goal here is to change my mind, not score points.
Well, I'm trying to convince you that your own objectives, if you're a conservative, cannot be achieved under capitalism.
Okay.
And so I'll give you an example of that.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Republicans like Paul Ryan who are obstructing Donald Trump. Well, hold on.
Exactly, picks up Paul Ryan, the biggest rhino that was in the house. Yeah, that's why he made that laugh, because Paul Ryan to us is a Democrat wearing a Republican suit. That's why we call him a rhino, which actually stands for Republican in name only. Okay.
You cannot deny that he is a big capitalist, and he has lots of capitalist donors that would like nothing more than to increase their profits. I think you can agree with that. And people like that have been opposing immigration reform for decades because they believe that mass immigration will lower the wages of the working class and increase their profit.
I agree with that. Okay. Just because he's a rhino doesn't mean that he's a communist. Doesn't mean that Paul Ryan is a socialist. And does that mean that Paul Ryan has donors that are out to make sure that they keep those borders open and so that they can influx a bunch of people in at a lower wage? Absolutely. That's why many people, such as myself, who are conservative, aren't necessarily Republican or Democrat. We are 100% not Democrat because we know that the Democrats have gone so far left into socialism and communism. But there are many people in the Republican Party that we need to get rid of as well, and we feel it and we know it, such as Paul Ryan. Bye-bye, Paul.
Now, I would say a lot of what you just said is correct.
Okay.
In that many conservatives, Republicans, believe that mass immigration from countries like, say, Mexico, from quote-unquote third world countries, could lower the wages. Yeah, I do believe that a lot of Republicans believe that. Okay, so I would agree with you on that.
So if you impose a minimum wage, you're not going to have this mass immigration coming in because the companies that are taking these illegal immigrants and taking these low-wage immigrants, if they had to pay them $15 an hour, we wouldn't have mass immigration like we're having right now.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I agree with that premise. So let me kind of go, because first off, before I would like to take that, hold it. What example will we point to before we go on? Because I know a lot of times we disagree, of a successful...
Boom. Watch where Steve's leading him. Because professors are trying to teach that proper socialism are places like the Scandinavian countries. The premise is that that's how a socialist country should be. But those aren't socialist countries. Okay? So here's a student, and you can tell he's a well-educated student, but he's fallen into the indoctrination where he believes in what these socialist teachers are preaching. And they veered completely off of what the meaning of socialism is.
Socialist country.
Well, there are different kinds of socialism. I think you're thinking of the Soviet Union.
No, there are not different kinds of socialism. See, this is where they're misconstruing it, okay? And in fact, you heard that on the news the other day when they sit there and say, well, what's your definition of socialism? That's called postmodernism. Postmodernism is the land of subjectivity. Since 1968 and 1972, this whole era after the progressives took a hold of our country was to get rid of our objectivity and replace it with subjective facts. No longer is 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 can equal 5.
In Venezuela, when you say these are unsuccessful countries, but you also have Sweden, you have Norway, you have Finland, you have Denmark, you have Germany.
Sure.
Bingo. Those aren't socialist countries.
These are countries that have robust economies and high levels of socialization.
Right. What's their minimum?
Socialization. These misconstruing things. Just because you have some social reforms doesn't mean it's a socialist country. I lived over in the Netherlands for 2.5 years. It's not a socialist country. There are a lot of socialization, but the government doesn't own the production of means.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
What if I told you that they have no minimum wage?
There are plenty of countries that have high minimum wage. Australia has a high minimum wage.
I know, but we didn't talk about them. We talked about successful socialist economies. Now, first off, I think it's interesting. This is important because we need to define the premise. First off, we're away from the premise, which is the moral argument. I believe socialism is immoral. The redistribution of something that you have not earned, I believe, is fundamentally immoral. I believe that's theft.
Are you an anarchist?
Hold on a second. Then we'll go in. So now we moved on from that to the pragmatic. And no, I'm not an anarchist. And then you brought up successful examples in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, I believe.
Yeah.
First off, these aren't socialist countries. Now, the reason we would point to countries like, say, Venezuela or Cuba, for the same reason Bernie Sanders did for decades, is because they're true examples of socialism. The Danish Prime Minister said, Bernie, stop referring to us as a socialist economy. We're a free market economy. They don't have a minimum wage, as we know it. They only allow collective bargaining between unions, higher skilled unions, and their employers. So these are countries, by the way, if we want to get into their immigration laws, the only way to make it work, if you refer to those countries, I guess I would have to ask, it sounds almost as though...
And by the way, I lived in one of those countries. The only way I was able to get in was through the merit system. It's amazing, right? So all these countries that he's considering that are actually socialist countries, they're not. Okay? He's completely misconstrued.
Making an argument, are you a nationalist?
I would say I'm an economic nationalist.
You are an economic nationalist?
Yeah.
Okay. So
An economic nationalist is a conservative. So he doesn't even know. We proved that. We did our political spectrum chart. An economic nationalist is the same thing that Donald Trump is. I hardly think this guy is an economic nationalist. I believe the way he's talking, he's more leaning towards crony capitalism. He's leaning more towards progressivism, and probably doesn't even realize it, but he has a whole lot of socialist beliefs.
because you part ways with a lot of probably your more left-leaning brethren.
I never said I was a liberal.
Okay, so you're a conservative socialist. They're hard to come by.
Conservative socialist, there's no such thing. He's making fun of him. Okay, because I considered myself an economic nationalist. I was a former business owner, and I believe in economic nationalism. Okay, you will either make it or fail, depending on your strengths as an owner.
So no minimum wage there. But again, this doesn't change the idea. Let's get to the fundamental premise.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the pragmatic, and I'd be happy to. But I believe that socialism, the ism that we both agreed upon,
Yeah.
the collective means, seizing of distribution, production, is immoral.
Well, I mean, the argument is absurd, because if you say that it's immoral, then you also have to say that government funding of police is immoral, government funding of the military is immoral.
Boom. That's another thing you always hear them talk. That funding of the police and building bridges and schools and all that, that's socialism. Listen, it's not.
Anything the government does is immoral, and that's ridiculous, because you have to have some state that's going to socialize certain things. And so the question is not, do we have socialization? It's how much.
Sure.
Well, yeah, but having, building up a police force, building up a fire department, building up schools and bridges, that's not socialism.
I would disagree with that. Now, would you know where I disagree with that? Guess what I'm going to say.
I assume you're going to try to argue that government funding of the military and police is not socialism.
Why would I say that?
Well, because if you don't argue that, then you're going to have to give some ground on socialism.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. If I have to concede that police force, as he's saying, police force, military, roads is socialism, the same as healthcare, education, and I'm assuming that's why you're referring to Denmark and Sweden. They're not socialist economies, but they have more of a social safety net. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, they're social democracies.
They're market economies with higher emphasis on a social safety net. That's how.
Boom. Did you get that? They're market economies with a higher value on social reform. Okay? On the social safety net. They're not socialist countries.
They describe
That's what a social democracy is.
So okay, we agree on the term. Let's go with social.
Social democracy. This is where you get your socialist Democrats. Wrong. That's not what social democracy is. Social democracy, I want you to look up the definition of Bolshevism. Bolshevism, though all of those people, all those communists were called socialist Democrats.
Democracy. I just want to make sure we don't get confused like democratic socialism as though that changes anything. But we just talked about this, conceding that ground. I don't believe that the military and the police force would be the same as socialized healthcare school.
Why not?
Sorry, because we only have one microphone. We had to do a late setup. I appreciate you working with me.
Well, I mean...
Why not? Why not was your question.
Our definition was that...
So why not?
Yeah.
Okay, so make sure you don't... why not? Because there's a difference between a public good and a commodity.
Bingo. Bingo.
Can you explain to me the difference between public goods and a commodity?
Well, in economics, a public good is a good that is, I believe, non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that would include things like the police, the military. You'd be hard-pressed to even find hardcore libertarians who say that we don't need those. Okay. So there's a big difference. There's a fundamental difference between that and something like healthcare or school.
It's still
or it goes to free internet, as Sven Computer talked about in Germany now. High-speed internet is a right. The second you declare any commodity to be a right or to be a fundamental role of...
What's happening is you get these people who are actually trying to perceive a commodity as a right. It's not a right. They're trying to... This is where the misinterpretation, and it's purposeful misinterpretation to try to pull people away from the true meaning of what socialism is.
Government, that means the government can now remove that right depending on who's in power, and that's the problem. That's why I think it's fundamentally immoral for someone to take something they haven't earned, regardless of who's in power. I think it's immoral for Donald Trump's administration to take it from you, just as you probably think it's immoral for Barack Obama's administration to take it from me. So the difference there would be, first, public goods versus commodity. And I think that's an important distinction for everyone here to make.
Public good versus commodity. Okay? A public good, the police force. A public good, the armed forces. The public good. Fire department. Commodity. Healthcare. But they're trying to misinterpret by putting healthcare as a public good. It's not, it's a commodity.
This is a common argument we hear from the left. If you support any role of government at all, that means that this is socialism. But it's not according to the definition that we agreed upon. Something else, I think it also matters, the constitutional parameters of government, right? What the Constitution defines what our government is and what fundamental human rights are.
Well, I want to get back to your earlier point where you said that because the military is a public good, that therefore it's not socialism. In your definition, you never made any distinction between different types of goods. You just said a socialist economy is one that takes wealth from some people and gives it to others, and that's what financing a public good is.
Well, no, it's not. You talked about redistributing. The redistribution, the common means of production or...
Redistribution of... socialism is the redistribution of goods. Okay?
Distribution. So if we want to frame that in, I certainly wouldn't say that that's the police. Oh, someone's yelling. Hopefully we're good. So I would not agree with it. The military or police would be socialist. But to move on here, again, let's go to the Danes, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. You pointed to them as successful examples of socialism, because that would be different from your definition of socialism. So now I moved on from the idea that taking something you haven't earned to give to someone else is morally reprehensible, regardless of the reason, because socialism can only be enacted to the threat of violence. That's really what taxes are. At the end of the day, we all agree on that.
Violence is part of life.
Okay, well, I don't believe there should be a part of life for someone with guns to come in if I don't pay for Timmy's health care. I just disagree with that.
If you don't pay taxes, you're going to have other forms of violence that arise spontaneously. This sort of autistic libertarian idea of, oh, you can have a non-aggression...
Stop it. He's been watching Matt Damon videos. Continue.
This idea of a non-aggression principle is just fantasy, okay? You have to have...
Describe to me, you just said autistic, and this was very civil until you brought that up. Define autistic here.
Well, it tends to be characterized by an overemphasis on logic and philosophy as opposed to reality. You know, it's very easy to argue from syllogisms and axioms and all that.
So hold on a second, I want to make sure, before you move, because what you do is you speak in these paragraphs. We need to determine what these definitions are. I think we both agree that's fair.
Fine.
Okay, so you just said that autism, if I'm not mistaken, and I would love for you to bring this up, is rooted more in philosophy and theology than facts? Than logic or reason?
Logic, syllogisms, that sort of thing.
That's what you believe is the definition of autism?
Well, because it leads you down these intellectual...
No, do you believe that's the definition of autism?
No,
no, you don't.
I'm using it in an informal way.
Okay, so you're using it in an insulting way.
You could say that.
Okay.
A little bit of banter.
A little bit of, yeah. Well, we don't call that friendly banter generally. Okay. We call that being a dick. So I want to go back to hopefully keeping it civil. You know, I wouldn't call you retarded. You know, I wouldn't say that you had a fight with the Clippers and the Clippers won. I wouldn't do this. Let's keep this very civil. So let's go back to Sweden, Denmark, Norway as examples. you pointed to them as successful examples of socialism. And it was interesting to me that you said, I know you'd want to point to the USSR or Venezuela or these places, but really we should look to these Scandinavian countries.
Sure.
Why?
Because they provide a good quality of life for their citizens. You don't have this gigantic gap between the working class and the upper class. There is a...
But it's free market capitalism. It's not socialism. They're misconstruing all of this. The Danish countries, okay, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, they're not socialist countries, okay?
Of the state to the well-being of their citizens, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Okay.
And by the way, Sweden's having a hell of a hard time with illegal immigration and a very feminist type of movement towards socialism, okay? They're going to be in trouble soon because they're trying to push socialism into that country. They really are.
So first off, I agree with you that first off, the overall well-being of citizens is a tremendous thing. I think we would all want. I think everyone here wants a better society, wants a better America. I don't think that you want a worse America. No. I hope that you don't believe I want a worse America, despite the fact that you implied I might be autistic. So maybe I don't know what's best for America. You know, autistic and such. Keep your hate speech off this campus. But your reasoning there, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said there isn't the same kind of gap, the inequality gap. That was your, I want to get, because you speak in, like I said, in longer paragraphs. Sure. It seems the fundamental premise there was Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they're examples because they're successful. They have a higher quality of living, and the main purpose, the main justification used was there's less of an inequality gap. Am I correct? I don't want to misrepresent you.
Yes.
Okay. So your problem is with inequality.
It's one of several problems. I think another problem when you
that was your first issue. Let's go point by point. Okay.
Fair enough.
Inequality. What's immoral about inequality?
Because there's this idea that you're going to have this society and everybody has social obligations. But if you have a situation where people are being crushed or where people's wages are going down, you lose the social cohesiveness of that society. You lose the commitment that everybody has to advancing that society.
Hold on a second. I want to, because now you're getting into potential results. The hypothetical, almost autistic, one could say.
It's real.
But I ask again, what is immoral about inequality?
What's immoral is that it ruins the society. That's what's immoral about it.
How does inequality ruin society? Because it sounds to me, if I'm not mistaken, what you just went down and described was a problem with poverty.
Yeah.
So your problem is with poverty then?
But poverty is a consequence of inequality.
That's not necessarily true.
No, it's not.
But, and as a matter of fact, I would argue that there are two very different things. Because I would say, and I think we'd probably have to agree, that the free enterprise, westernized capitalist system has pulled more people out of poverty than any system in existence. And if you look at countries, you said don't point to countries like Venezuela or true socialist economies, there's tremendous equality, but everyone is equally poor. So the problem you have is with poverty, it sounds like, and I think we both have a problem with that we want to solve ways to eliminate as much poverty.
Good point. You always hear them talking about equality, equality, equality. Venezuela has equality, big time. They're all equally broke. Okay? So what people have a problem with is this civil rights issue of people being poor. Okay? Continue.
Poverty is possible.
It's not just poverty. Inequality matters too. Because if you have inequality of wealth, you're going to have an upper class that controls the political system and secures its own interests instead of the interests of the people. Okay. So yes, inequality matters as well.
Okay. So describe to me, and then I'd like to go back to that, examples of this, the upper ruling class determining the political system.
You want examples of that?
I would like some examples of that.
Sure.
Because I believe, so for example, let's say, you mentioned that inequality hurts people. I would argue no, and I think that's because, again, this is more of a leftist view. I know you said you're not really liberal, but I can tell you by your worldview in economics that you do lean more left because you're seeing it as a zero-sum game. Wealthy people can't get wealthy off of the backs of poor people if they make them more poor. That's kind of, if we're going to talk about motives and attributing motives, that you've done a couple of times here, if I believe if I want everyone to be wealthy, I would necessarily, if I need a system of government that would want people to be wealthy, would require people to be wealthy.
By the way, there's another thing. He says he doesn't believe he's leaning left, and the thing is this. This is another thing they teach. As they start to teach people about socialism, they move the political spectrum chart, all right? And so what they do is they take the political spectrum chart and they shift it so very, 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 very far left. And they say those people are centrist. So in this boy's mind, he doesn't think he's left-wing. Okay, he doesn't understand it. That, yeah, the zero-sum gain, this whole socialist view is very left-wing. They're even trying to steal terms like, he called himself an economic nationalist. Ooh, really tricky here. Because a nationalist can be left or right. And when they're talking about economic nationalism, well, social economics, you're dealing with crony capitalism, kind of like the same behavioral pattern as somebody like Hillary Clinton. Very left-wing. But they're letting people think that that is right-wing. It's not.
Someone who would want to control a system of government like in socialist economies, who would want to consistently talk or gain the votes of the poor, they could only be elected if people are poor. Bernie Sanders is not going to be elected by a rich country.
We're not trying to make everybody rich. That's not possible. We're trying to create a fair distribution of wealth. But I want to get back to your earlier question about how are the wealthy controlling the political
system.
So
let's an example of that. I don't believe that inequality necessarily hurts them. I don't believe it's a zero-sum game. For example, Tim Cook, and I don't like Tim Cook, by the way. I know Apple people, Android, they're going to start yelling. Tim Cook creating a better iPhone, even though the iPhone 10 kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's where we get the passion. That doesn't hurt me. Him making billions of dollars from that doesn't hurt me. Poverty, bread lines, $160 for a dozen eggs. That hurts me. I have a problem with poverty. I don't care if someone else has more than me, so long as I have a system where I'm able to do okay.
You understand that it's the upper class and the capitalists that want mass immigration and want illegal immigration because it's in their economic self-interest. If you're a Republican and you're with the capitalists...
We're not disagreeing with that, but watch where he goes with this. If you're an economic, if you're a capitalist, you're with the what?
You're going against your own interests. The capitalists are not conservative. They're not.
Well, hold on a second. We're talking about capitalists.
Capitalists are not conservative? How is that so? Please, tell us, Yusuf.
Conservative Republican here. So you're saying that capitalism, we're talking about the ism now, socialism versus capitalism. Yeah. I don't care what Paul Ryan does in his own time. I don't care what his front page news press is doing P90X and what he thinks about immigration. I couldn't care less.
So what
I don't believe in it. I don't believe. It seems that you would agree in securing the borders. It seems that you would agree in stricter immigration laws.
I would, and it's not. You're not going to get it if you shill for the capitalists.
Well,
they're against you.
Define shill.
Well, if you're
I know you like to sound really intelligent by speaking in paragraphs. One thing, you've misused words several times. And if someone were to call you on it and be as rude as you are, you might look what you might refer to as stupid.
Okay.
So saying autistic or shill, define, because it's a very specific definition. You came in and just said shill. Yeah. And I'm really quickly get ready to give the microphone to someone else. If you don't stop doing this, because this isn't the goal of this, what's a shill?
Well, I think you're getting upset because you're losing the debate. But
that's fair. That's fair. What's a shill? No. The person losing the debate is the one who refers to the other person as autistic and a shill. That's generally a good sign. So what's a shill?
I don't have the exact definition, but essentially someone who's, pushing or advancing somebody else's interests, I suppose.
For profit.
Fair enough. But a lot of these conservatives who...
Well, you're not talking to these conservatives, you're talking to me. This isn't a performance, Paul, here. That's why we're doing this out here. This is a conversation. You're talking to me. I just said that I'm against illegal immigration. It's okay. You can look me in the eyes. I'm not mad at you. I just think it's rude. It's okay. Don't worry. We're okay. I'm used to people being rude to me. I'm sure you're probably aware of this to one degree or another. Let's move back to, again, Norway, Sweden. We didn't really kind of go to that. You've talked about them as successful examples. Now, we refer to them, and I would agree. I would agree that if we're going to take a model and say they've created a social safety net that functions better than many other countries. For example, socialized healthcare and education.
What's wrong with that?
Good. Well, so you would support school vouchers?
No.
I think, in general, vouchers, I think, have a problem because they do lead to the incentivization of private schools. But okay. Any way that the government
I just say it because that's what Sweden does.
Yes.
So you would support more of a flat tax and increasing taxes on the middle class and the lower class?
I want a progressive tax.
Okay, well, that's not what happens in Denmark.
They should change it.
Okay, so you would want a lower corporate tax rate?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so here's the one thing. We point to, and I appreciate you taking, what was your name again?
Yusuf.
Yusuf, I appreciate Yusuf taking the time. Everyone give a hand to Yusuf. Appreciate it very much. We'll grab someone else here. Thank you, Yusuf. This is always interesting to me because we talk about this a lot, and I know, and if we look here, just so, I think we've talked about this, we're going to be actually selling for like $5 or $6. I'm not looking for near, we're going to be selling the Change My Mind pamphlet so that you guys can actually be prepared for some of these arguments. Right here on page 3, I actually have, if anyone here, you know what, kind of like a magician. Oh, you have a MAGA hat. Can you come here really quickly? What are the words written down right there?
Denmark.
Denmark
Sweden.
and
Norway.
Norway. So, if you guys know where people are going to try and direct the conversation, and you don't get distracted by words like, autistic or shill, which is what they throw out, you can be prepared very often for how people disagree. Now, here's the thing. To provide a brief education on Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, I didn't think that was going to go anywhere super productive.
Listen, this is the single biggest argument of why these people are indoctrinated and are letting themselves be indoctrinated. Listen.
They made their wealth long before they became what you would call socialist economies. Now, by the way, they're not socialist economies. The Danish Prime Minister, when Bernie Sanders was saying, we should be like Denmark, socialist, he said, shut up! He said we're a free market economy, and we place emphasis on social safety nets, which they are now scaling back. Here's what's so interesting there. If you look, they have far...
Bingo. They brought up social safety nets in order to try to, like you said, try to create inequality, and then they're bringing them back down because they don't need them anymore. Okay? People are getting the jobs. No minimum wage. True market, the actual market value is actually decides what people get paid. Okay? You get paid €9. That's what it is in that town. In another town, it could be €11. It could be €12. Okay? So whatever the market value is. Okay, there were social safety nets, and they are scaling back down because they realize that if you try to have too many social safety nets, people are going to think that they should deserve them all the time. Okay, and this is where the communists come into play, because they always sit there and say, we need this, we deserve this, we deserve this, we deserve this, because it's our God-given right. They are not a socialist country. Continue.
Lower corporate tax rates than the United States. Does anyone know the corporate tax rate in the United States? The marginal highest tax rate? Yes.
35%, but now it's 27 with the tax.
It would go down to, yes, the marginal rate I believe was up as high as 39.
30,
yeah, 39. I think it's 35, but the marginal highest tax rate was 39%. And in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, I think the highest they have is 25. Some of them have it as low as 22. So a good 10 points lower. So they have corporate taxes low. I think if you're comparing it...
Corporate taxes are low, which is where we're trying to be. We tried to lower ours, but you saw how much of a struggle that was. We went from 35 to 27. I think we got down to 22.
United States, if you make 1.2 times the average income, so in the United States, that would be $50,000. If you make $60,000, you'd be paying 60% income tax. So what they do is they understand that they can't stifle businesses, so you have lower corporate tax rates than...
I think it is 27.
The United States. Doesn't sound very socialist, and they have increased taxes on the middle and lower classes. They pay more taxes. Everyone pays something. By the way, super strict, well, it's changing, but at one point, super strict immigration laws. Not everyone gets to take part in the social safety net if you haven't paid in. And again, these are people who have the population about the size of Ohio or Michigan. So to compare an entirely homogenous population to a country of 300-something million people. By the way, I'm against illegal immigration, but the big difference between us and Denmark and Norway and Sweden is we're not a people, we are a country of ideals. And if you're willing to come in and make a go of it, we're going to provide you with equal opportunity, not ensure equal outcome. That's the difference that requires a racial national identity and a constitutional republic. So ironically, socialism almost invariably tends to be racist. To a certain degree, which is funny when we say national socialism, democratic socialism.
Sounds like an Nazi to me.
Theft is theft. If you're taking if it's ill-gotten gain, something you haven't earned, theft is theft. Something else I also find very interesting, and I'll talk about this. I just wanted to bring this up so you can see that these are things you can prepare for. These are very common arguments. Very interesting. If we take that kind of cultural social fabric of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, so take them. They do have a higher standard of living on average than the average American. But if you take the Danes who are in America, if you take Swedish Americans, if you take Norwegian Americans, they actually have on average a 55% higher standard of living index than the Swedes in Sweden. So it's because they've brought a culture with them. Again, if you look at the very storied culture of...
Right. They got a job based on their merit. They're educated. So when they come to this country, they've actually brought with them that culture of learning and education, and that's what we're looking for in this country. Okay. Note, all the people that are coming up from the caravan, they're not like that. They're there to bring in chaos, demise, destruction. All right. And I predicted that back in June that this was going to happen, and they were going to try to create a caravan every week if they could to bring millions upon millions of people, because it was the only way that Andrés Manuel López Obrador could actually institute his communist government and be successful at it, as well as he is getting support and help from people like Venezuela and Cuba, as well as the Democratic Party, as well as the globalists such as George Soros. They all want to see the destruction of the United States.
Hard work ethics, personal accountability, of shame, they do better there, and they do far better in the United States than even in their homeland. So you get people who have that work ethic, who have that kind of cultural fabric, who have that history, and you give them a free enterprise system, my God, watch them bloom. But I appreciate, I forgot his name, Yusuf. Thank you very much.
Okay. There. That was a good one. That's all I wanted to do on this part, because it's really, really important that you guys understand what these people are calling socialist countries. All right. And they use little examples like that too, as well as not just the countries. They talk about the police force and, building roads and bridges and schools as socialism. That's not socialism. Okay. This is how and they also consider themselves, what's the third point? The third point is they also consider themselves centrist. Okay. This is all indoctrination from their professors. They're not centrists. They're not teaching them what real socialism is. Okay? It's indoctrination. All right, guys. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed this one.